So Readiness came out of the field of athlete monitoring, which was supposed to help us understand when athletes were ready to perform on game day. So they're going through training, are they adapting and are they recovering such that when they get to that critical moment, they're ready to go. And so we've kind of evolved that and widened it to be applicable to everyday athletes. So you can keep track of how you're adapting and recovering in your daily training. So even though you may not have game day on the horizon, you can make sure that the training program is suiting you appropriately and that your behaviors are helping you recover optimally. So Readiness really becomes all about stress and recovery management. So, when you think about it, you think about all these stressors you have in your life. So you have work and you have family. Obviously, those things can be stressful. Training is also a stressor. It's just the one we choose, the one we like. It doesn't mean that your body doesn't see it as stress. But in the end, a lot of those things kind of, broadly speaking, go into the same bucket. And you have to manage them all appropriately so that they don't overwhelm you. The idea is to try to adjust everything else before you go changing your training, right? Who hasn't bitten off more they can chew, right? Second week into a program, you're super sore, you're not quite making the progress you thought you would, kind of questioning whether it's the right thing. But if you're on a good program, right, things can still go wrong outside the gym. Most of your time in your life is outside the gym. So when we measure readiness, and in TrainHeroic we do that with like a simple subjective survey, and we look at sleep, mood, energy, stress, and soreness. Most of us know about these things at this point, but until we're aware that they're a problem, we're not really motivated to change our behaviors, right? So TrainHeroic's Readiness is meant to kind of prod you in the right direction and say, hey, you're not sleeping as well as you had been. Hey, your stress is a little high. Remember that meditation thing you said you're gonna do? Maybe it's time to try that. So as I said, these are subjective measures. They're really easy for you to answer in a quick 5 to 10 second survey before you train. And one good thing about them is kind of like rapid journaling, right? So when they get kind of like resurfaced to you, it's kind of hard to argue with it, right? So if you've been saying, hey, I'm not sleeping that well, it's kind of like a friend saying like, hey man, you've been saying that a lot lately. And it's hard to deny your own words. So there's a lot of trust in that system where, hey, this is my own feedback to myself essentially. So as I mentioned, in TrainHeroic we use these subjective measures. Now there are also objective measures, the most familiar of which is probably HRV to most people. And you might say, well, isn't that better? You can just use a device and it tells you a number that tells you what your readiness is. Well, in some situations, yeah, HRV can work pretty well. It's most valid under conditions of essentially strict conditioning type training. So aerobic athletes, so running, cycling. It's been used and validated there to help guide training decisions. And it can work quite well there. It does sometimes get thrown off and lead to kind of user distrust in situations where there's a lot of strength training involved. That's because really your subjective feelings in HRV are going to measure, in some cases, slightly different things. So HRV is most specifically a measure of what you call cardio-autonomic function. So it's looking at the state of your cardiovascular and autonomic nervous system, because that's what it's really measuring. It's measuring nervous inputs to the heart, essentially. That means that it can miss out on those peripheral factors like soreness or local muscular fatigue that just haven't really recovered. So there is overlap there, and they may be able to reinforce each other, but they do give you slightly different information. One of the values to tracking your subjective wellness over time is that it does encourage you to be reflective of how you're feeling. So rather than outsourcing that to a product that reads some signal that you may or may not be able to sense, it's encouraging you to reflect and think about how your behaviors and training are going and what you could do differently. Put simply, it's something asking you, hey, how are you doing today, right? And how often do people genuinely ask you on a daily basis, like, hey, how are you doing? They might ask you, but really it's like usually a greeting that you don't intend to actually answer the question. So it forces you to stop for a second and just think, just reflect about how things are going.